Okay, so my project was on the forced migration of Cherokee Indians and the lasting effects it has had on their culture and their people. I learned when I was a little girl that my hometown, a place called Muskegon, was home to a small band of Mohawk Indians called the Constantinians. I was fascinated by the Iroquois life and culture. And now, as an HTS major, I strive to expand my knowledge on the crimes that were perpetrated against all Native Americans and continue to be perpetrated against them. These maps, the slide before you, shows the Cherokee's nations before 1930s. Starting in 1721, though, there were secessions of land by the U.S. government, resulting in, by 1838, that the Cherokees were mostly concentrated in that bordered area that's orange. However, today they are presently located in northeastern Oklahoma and western, very small region of western North Carolina. So the Trail of Tears. Trail of Tears began with the state governments trying to taking away sovereignty of Cherokees and other four of the five civilized nations. Rights and sovereignties. The five civilized nations were considered the most assimilated to American culture already. They had adopted a lot of Southern American culture, such as plantation owning, and one of the most controversial parts of Cherokee history is that they did own slaves. So to fight the states taking away their rights and their sovereignty, many Native Americans took their cases to the Supreme Court. And the court actually ruled in their favor, objecting to the state practices, saying Cherokee Indians were a sovereign nation. However, the then President Andrew Jackson refused to enforce this because in 1830 he had signed the Indian Removal Act, which essentially gave the power to the U.S. government to exchange the native land, their native lands in the South for land out in the west of the Mississippi. So all the while they were fighting this, however, in 1835, a self-appointed group of Cherokee representatives went to the U.S. government and negotiated with them. This became known as the Treaty of ISGEOG. I'm not sure if I said that right either. This treaty basically traded all of the land for $5 million in relocation assistance out west. This slide shows the Trail of Tears of both the routes. So the forced migration aspect comes in summer of 1838 when 7,000 U.S. soldiers were sent to clear the Cherokee Nation. Men, women, and children were all taken and held at stockades while the soldiers burned down their homes. I also would like to note that they were taken to these stockades and they had no food or water. They were not given warning to when these soldiers were going to show up, so they had no supplies with them. And I also read somewhere that a couple bands of around 100 Cherokees were immediately taken out west, while the majority were held back in these stockades. John Ross, the chief of Cherokees, who had also nothing to do with the treaty, asked the then President Martin Van Buren if the Cherokees could do their own removal in the winter months after what was called the disease season passed. So they didn't set out until November 1838. Upon arrival to their new home, they had endured severe weather conditions, abuse of soldiers, illnesses, diseases, exhaustion, emotional and physical devastation, inadequate food supply, clothing, and shelter. More affluent Cherokees had been able to take their livestock with them and benefit from that. They could afford homes and cultivate crops, while the rest fell and suffered from poverty and diseases such as cholera and malaria consumption. The time range is considered to be from summer 1838, not 1938, and continued into the year after they settled. So obviously there were immediate losses in population. So before the forced migration, there were about 16,000 Cherokees. After, there was 12,000 Cherokees. So scholars mostly believe that 4,000 people died. However, some research points to the fact that the Trail of Tears if the Trail of Tears had not happened, that the population would have actually grown by 10,000 people, meaning that the loss of life was a lot greater than originally thought, because there should have been 10,000 more people alive. So if you think about it, that means that 14,000, they actually lost 14,000 people because of forced migration. Other immediate losses included plant life. Plant life was important to the Cherokee culture. They knew what plants could be used for food, medicine, fiber, dye, and ceremonial uses. This knowledge was passed down through generations, and by the ages of 7 and 8, most children would know more about flora and fauna than the average graduate student studying in that field. Plants also were believed to be friendly to man when animals were not, so they were a big part of their belief system. So the trailhead actually impacted this knowledge and system because 1/3 of the vegetation that was culturally significant to them was lost, meaning that many practices were abandoned. And then this slide shows the 9 most culturally significant plants that were lost as the result of forced migration. More long-term effects includes dietary change. Dietary change was due to because of being confined to the reservation, but also because of the Civil War. Because they were confined to the reservation, they had less area to search for game, but also the area that they had been placed in, was a lot hard to cultivate agriculture in. Meaning when the Civil War did happen, it left a lot of agricultural destruction and livestock destruction. Meaning their diet, which was usually fresh fruits, vegetables, and game, began to shift more towards canned, pickled, and sugar-based foods, meaning there began to be a higher rise in diabetes, type 2 diabetes specifically, and obesity. And this can be seen in these statistics from 2003. The Eastern Band Cherokees reservation who live on a reservation had a lot more high obesity rates and type 2 diabetes rates than the person who did not, than the average North Carolinian person. So reservation schools were constructed and implemented to fix the Indian problem that the forced migration apparently did not fix, even though that they were using that same excuse to move the Native Americans. So these reservation schools and other Indian boarding schools basically wanted to force assimilate American culture onto the younger generation of Native Americans through education and rigorous manual labor. I kind of think that as the forced migration of the Cherokees and the 5 civilized nations and the long walk of Navajo kind of showed the government that they were able to get away with these things. So as a result, I think this in a way was a result of them getting away with what they had done before to the Native Americans. So the idea was to train and educate Indian youth to have American morals and become more industrious laborers for the country. However, these places were very poor conditions. Disease was everywhere. Infectious diseases such as mumps, measles, and smallpox were double to triple the national averages, while trachoma and tuberculosis were worse. 3 out of every 10 students would be infected with one of those diseases. Children would die at school, and all the parents would be a letter home saying, "Oh yeah, your child died," but it would not give a reason because they didn't want to admit to the conditions at the school. Children were also sent home right before they would die sometimes, or when they knew that they were going to get infected, and when they did get infected, so then they would just die at home, and that wouldn't impact the school at all. The rigorous manual labor included farming, cooking, cleaning, making their own clothes and shoes, and operating laundry services in 100-degree temperatures. And they did all this rigorous manual labor while being very underfed. So that is a slide that shows trachoma rates in select off-school reservation boarding schools. Still very high comparatively towards what would be the national averages during this time. So not only did it have a health and population impact, it had a cultural impact. Children were not allowed to speak their native tongues, only English. They were not allowed to keep their native names that they were given to at birth. They had to change to Christian ones. So, I mean, you can also already see the effects this would have later on in life, because they would basically have be given a new identity at the age of like 10 or 8 or 6, and they had to change to that, but they had two identities essentially. To give a child that it really wrecks them psychologically. Other things where boys had to cut off, not to cute off, their long hair, even though this had religious and cultural meaning for some of their tribes. And they were also not taught rituals and celebration of their ancestors because they were at these boarding schools. So, like, knowledge that would pass down through generations, like for Cherokees, the plant life information, that would not be passed down. So this is a slideshow depicting before and after picture of a group of children arriving at our reservation school. Sinusaquaham. I'm not quite sure if that's actually how you say it, but that is the native tongue of the Cherokee Nation. They recently started a language preservation program that would help expand and retain the fluency of the languages throughout the generation by orienting schools to more language education. John Standing Deer received a patent just last year for a program that would help decode the Cherokee language and make it easier to learn, because it is, as you can tell, one of the hardest in the world to learn. Inherited trauma. Trauma has been passed down through generations. It can be seen anywhere on a reservation, from alcoholism to high rates of suicide, substance abuse, and poverty. Teens are most at risk. And this basically is from survivor's guilt. Native Americans are very sensitive to this because they've always had this struggle as a result of everything that's happened to them with their identity, and they kind of take on the trauma and the grief that the ancestors that went through onto them. Cherokee Nation today is one of the more better off reservations. They have their own holidays, they have their identity cards that actually pass the form ID outside of the reservation too, and they actually also have their own license plates, and they do powwows, and they're one of the better off nations. They are roughly 300,000 strong in population. However, there are still a lot of current issues regarding Native Americans, such as Standing Rock. Many reservations, like Standing Rock, have shrunken in size because they've had to sell off land in order to pay for infrastructure issues. The Sioux people, however, some of their land was given away, or was taken away by the government. I'm not quite sure what the reasoning behind that is. I don't think many people do. They also face a lot of environmental issues. A lot of pipelines, not only at this reservation, but many other reservations, would go through or around their land, polluting it and making the water undrinkable. And a lot of corporations and companies take advantage of them because they're on the fringe of society, and the U.S. government politics don't really care too much about them. So there's still a stigma on them, both economically and in the government, that treat them less than human, which is not okay. And that also brings up the point of the fact that one of the more, in my field, in the HCS field, it is a big controversy whether or not to call it what has happened to them for the past 400 and so years genocide or not, depending on what you think genocide is, the meaning, what the definition of genocide is, but by the UN definition. So there's still a lot of bad things happening to them even today, not just to the Cherokee people, but to Native Americans today, and it's not okay.